I remember the exact moment my sister, Sarah, declared war on my peace. It was a scorching July afternoon, the kind where the air shimmers above the asphalt, and even the cicadas sound exhausted. I was on the phone, trying to finalize the catering for my daughter's engagement party, a day I'd been dreaming of for years, when Sarah's voice, shrill and demanding, cut through my thoughts. "She didn't ask," she commanded. My beloved beach house, the one I'd poured my heart and soul into, the sanctuary I'd meticulously crafted over 2 decades, was to be hers, for a full month. Not for her small family, mind you, but for a sprawling contingent of 22 in-laws, relatives I'd never even met. My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. This wasn't a casual request. It was an ultimatum delivered with the icy precision of a seasoned negotiator. She expected me to uproot my life, cancel my meticulously planned party, and hand over the keys to my slice of paradise, all so her husband's extended family could enjoy a free vacation. A vacation, I might add, that would cost me thousands in lost rental income, not to mention the emotional toll of having my sanctuary invaded. I tried to reason with her, to explain the significance of the engagement party, the sentimental value of the beach house, the sheer impossibility of her request. But Sarah, as always, was impervious to logic or empathy. Her voice, usually so sweet when she wanted something, hardened into a weapon. "It's family, Emily," she snapped, as if that single word was a magic key that unlocked every door, justified every imposition. "You always make such a fuss. It's just a house." Just a house? This wasn't just a house. It was the culmination of my dreams, my late husband's legacy, the place where my children had grown up. It held more memories than she could ever comprehend. The conversation ended in a furious deadlock, her threats hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I spent the next few days in a fog of disbelief and simmering resentment. How could my own sister, the person I'd shared a childhood with, treat me with such callous disregard? The resentment festered, a bitter seed planted deep within me. It wasn't just about the beach house anymore. It was about years of her taking, her demanding, her assuming I would always bend to her will. This time something snapped. Then came the betrayal. Not from Sarah, not directly, but from someone I least expected. My daughter, Jessica, usually my rock, my confidant, called me with a voice laced with guilt. She confessed that Sarah had been secretly pressuring her, manipulating her with emotional blackmail, to convince me to give in. Sarah had painted me as the heartless, selfish sister, the one who cared more about money than family. Jessica, caught in the middle, had initially tried to mediate, but Sarah's relentless pressure had worn her down. My own daughter, caught in the crossfire of Sarah's relentless ambition, was being used as a pawn. The news hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't enough for Sarah to demand my property. She had to poison my relationship with my daughter. The resentment transformed into a burning rage, a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer just angry. I was obsessed. Obsessed with protecting what was mine. Obsessed with setting boundaries. Obsessed with finally, definitively, teaching Sarah a lesson she would never forget. I spent sleepless nights replaying every conversation, every past slight, every instance of her blatant disregard for my feelings. A plan began to form in the shadows of my mind. A plan born of quiet desperation and a fierce desire for justice. I started researching, delving into the intricacies of property law, tenant rights, and the less traveled paths of legal recourse. My friends, bless their hearts, tried to talk me down. "Emily, she's family," they'd say, their voices laced with concern. But they didn't understand. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about self-preservation. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my boundaries, my life. I knew what I had to do, and there was no turning back. The stage was set for a confrontation, not just with Sarah, but with a lifetime of unspoken grievances. And when she finally arrived at my beach house, expecting to find the keys waiting for her, she found something else entirely. something far more permanent. A notice, not from me, but from the county, sealed and official, a stark white rectangle fluttering in the gentle ocean breeze. What was on that notice and how it utterly shattered her world is a story you won't believe. My name is Sarah, and for 20 years I poured every ounce of my being into building a life that felt like a dream. It wasn't handed to me. I earned it, brick by painstaking brick. The crown jewel of that dream was my beach house in Malibu, a place where the Pacific kissed the shore just steps from my patio. I'd spent countless summers there, watching the sun dip into the ocean, listening to the waves lull me to sleep. It was more than a house, it was a sanctuary, a testament to my hard work and perseverance. Every piece of driftwood art, every seashell collected, each faded photograph on the mantelpiece held a memory. This house was my soul made tangible. Then came the call from my sister, Jessica. Jessica, who always believed the world owed her everything. Jessica, whose sense of entitlement was as vast and unyielding as the ocean itself. She'd always seen my success not as an inspiration, but as a personal affront, a resource she was somehow owed. This time, her demand was audacious even for her. She was planning a family reunion, her husband's family, all 22 of them, and she expected to commandeer my Malibu home for 2 solid weeks. Not ask, not request, but demand. "Sarah, it's perfect," she'd chirped, her voice oozing a false sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "It has enough bedrooms, and the beach access is ideal for the kids. We'll be there for the last 2 weeks of July. Just make sure the fridge is stocked, and the pool is sparkling." I remember the shock that pulsed through me, a cold wave far more chilling than any ocean breeze. It wasn't just the sheer nerve of her request, it was the complete disregard for my life. My schedule, my feelings, my sanctuary, my private haven, was being treated like a free hotel, a commodity to be exploited. I tried to reason with her, to explain that I had plans, that the house wasn't a vacant rental property. I told her I was working on a major project, that my schedule was packed. But Jessica merely laughed, a short, dismissive sound that echoed her lifelong belief that my needs were secondary to hers. "Oh, Sarah, don't be so dramatic," she'd scoffed. "It's just a house. You can stay at a hotel or something. Honestly, you always make such a fuss." That conversation ignited a slow burn of resentment within me, a fire that had been smoldering for years, fueled by a lifetime of her taking, and my giving. It wasn't just about the house. It was about every boundary she'd ever trampled, every favor she'd extracted, every time she'd treated me like a personal ATM or a convenient doormat. This wasn't just a request, it was an invasion, a complete erasure of my autonomy. My beach house was my last bastion of peace, and she was poised to desecrate it with her massive, demanding entourage. The days that followed were a blur of simmering anger and restless nights. I tried to find a compromise, offering to pay for a lovely rental property nearby for her and her in-laws. I even suggested alternative dates when I wouldn't be using the house. But Jessica was unyielding. Her vision was fixed, my house, her family, her way. She called repeatedly, each time her tone growing more insistent, more entitled. She started sending me lists of groceries she expected to find, requests for specific pool toys, even a demand for a new patio umbrella. It was as if she already owned the place, and I was merely the caretaker. The emotional toll was immense. My focus at work suffered, my appetite vanished, and the joy I usually found in my home was replaced by a gnawing dread. I walked through the rooms, picturing her boisterous in-laws, their muddy shoes on my white carpets, their sticky fingers on my antique furniture. The thought of them turning my tranquil retreat into a chaotic circus filled me with a deep, visceral revulsion. This was my line in the sand, the point where I finally realized I couldn't keep bending, couldn't keep sacrificing my peace for her insatiable demands. One afternoon, a package arrived from Jessica. Inside, nestled amongst tissue paper, was a cheap, gaudy welcome to the family banner and a note. "Just a little something to get the house ready, Sarah. Don't forget to put out fresh towels in all the bathrooms." "Can't wait." The sheer audacity of it, the assumption of my compliance, snapped something inside me. The resentment I felt transformed into something sharper, colder, and far more dangerous. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my boundaries, and my life from a sister who had always treated me as an extension of her own desires. I sat there, the tacky banner clutched in my hand, staring out at the endless expanse of the Pacific. The waves crashed against the shore, a rhythmic roar that suddenly sounded like a challenge. For years I had let Jessica walk all over me, always hoping that one day she would change, that she would finally see me as an equal, a sister deserving of respect. But that day never came. Instead, each concession I made only fueled her entitlement. This time, however, things would be different. This time, the ocean wouldn't be the only thing making waves. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that a storm was brewing and Jessica was about to be caught right in its eye. I wouldn't just refuse her, I would make her regret ever trying to take what was mine. The quiet, accommodating Sarah was gone. In her place, a new resolve had taken root, a fierce determination to protect my sanctuary, no matter the cost. The initial shock of Jessica's audacity quickly morphed into a cold, calculated resolve. I wasn't just going to say no, I was going to make sure she understood, truly understood, the implications of her entitled worldview. The image of her smug face, the casual dismissal of my life, replayed in my mind, fueling a fire I hadn't known I possessed. For years, I'd been the peacemaker, the one who always gave in to avoid conflict, especially with Jessica. Not anymore. This wasn't just about the house, it was about reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd allowed her to chip away at for decades. I began my research, not just into legal protections for my property, but into Jessica's own intricate network of social obligations and aspirations. She thrived on appearances, on projecting an image of effortless success and perfect family life. That was her Achilles heel, and I intended to exploit it. My first step was subtle, almost imperceptible. I started by accidentally letting slip to a mutual acquaintance, Brenda, about Jessica's grand plans for her husband's family reunion. Brenda, a notorious gossip, was the perfect conduit. I painted a picture of Jessica's incredible generosity, her willingness to host 22 people in my spacious Malibu estate, emphasizing the word spacious with a knowing wink. The seed was planted. Days turned into a week, and the silence from Jessica was deafening. I knew she was expecting me to fold, to eventually concede to her demands. She'd probably already started telling her in-laws about their upcoming luxurious stay. The thought brought a grim smile to my face. I imagined her sketching out itineraries, envisioning lavish dinners on my patio, all at my expense. This quiet anticipation was a new kind of power for me, a stark contrast to the anxiety I usually felt when dealing with her. Then came the texts. Not from Jessica directly, but from other family members, distant cousins and aunts I rarely spoke to. "Heard about Jessica's big reunion at your place, Sarah. How exciting. Or so generous of you to host everyone at the Malibu house." Each message was a tiny victory, confirming that the narrative was taking hold, that Jessica's carefully constructed illusion of ownership over my property was now public knowledge. The pressure was mounting on her, not from me, but from the very people whose admiration she craved. The phone finally rang, her number flashing on my screen like a warning siren. I let it ring twice, 3 times, before answering, allowing a carefully calibrated pause to hang in the air. "Sarah, what is going on?" Jessica's voice was tight, devoid of its usual saccharine sweetness. The anger was barely contained. "I've had Aunt Carol, Cousin Mark, and even your mother-in-law's sister calling me, congratulating me on using your house for my family reunion. What have you been telling people?" I feigned innocence, my voice calm and even. "Oh, Jessica, I just mentioned to Brenda how excited you were about hosting everyone. I thought you wanted people to know about your generous plans. After all, it's a huge undertaking, accommodating 22 people, isn't it? The subtle implication that she was taking on this burden herself, rather than simply commandeering my home, was precisely the twist I wanted to introduce. I knew how much she hated looking anything less than perfectly in control. A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "You did what?" "Sarah, you know I just assumed you'd let me use the house." It was a given. Her sense of entitlement was still breathtaking, but now it was laced with panic. Now everyone thinks I'm some kind of martyr hosting all these people. This is not what I wanted. "Well, Jessica," I replied, my voice still annoyingly placid, "perhaps you should have actually asked me before making such grand announcements. The house isn't a communal property, it's mine. And as I told you before, I have plans. Very important plans." The mention of my plans was a deliberate echo of her earlier dismissal of my life, a mirror held up to her own self-centeredness. The conversation quickly devolved into a heated exchange, with Jessica alternating between furious accusations and desperate pleas. She even tried guilt-tripping me, bringing up childhood memories where I supposedly always had everything. It was a familiar tactic, one that had worked on me countless times before, but not this time. Each word she uttered, each attempt to manipulate, only solidified my resolve. I felt a strange sense of liberation, shedding the decades of obligation and resentment that had tethered me to her demands. "Jessica," I stated, cutting through her tirade with a voice that surprised even myself with its firmness. "The house is not available. Period. You made assumptions, and now you have to deal with the consequences of those assumptions. It's not my responsibility to fix your social blunders." I could almost hear her jaw drop. The silence that followed was delicious, thick with her disbelief and dawning realization. I had never spoken to her like that before. The quiet, accommodating Sarah was truly gone. I hung up, a tremor running through my hand, but it wasn't fear. It was the thrill of a battle finally joined, of taking a stand. The phone rang again almost immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. I needed to savor this moment, this small but significant victory. I knew this was just the beginning. Jessica wouldn't give up easily. She would regroup, strategize, and come back with a new assault. But I was ready. The resentment that had simmered for so long was now a focused energy, a weapon I was finally learning to wield. The game had truly begun, and I was no longer playing by her rules. The silence that followed my refusal was deafening. A thick, uncomfortable blanket that Jessica eventually ripped away with a shriek. Her voice, usually so carefully modulated for maximum effect, cracked with genuine outrage. She couldn't comprehend that I, Sarah, her older sister, would dare to defy her. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the frantic recalculation of her entitlement. She didn't just want my house, she felt she deserved it, that its very existence was an inconvenience to her grand plans. The ensuing phone calls and texts became a relentless barrage, each message a new flavor of manipulative artistry. Initially, she tried the wounded victim routine, painting herself as the heartbroken sister whose generous offer of a family reunion was cruelly rejected. Her husband, Mark, even sent me a surprisingly polite yet clearly orchestrated text about how much it would mean to Jessica, as if I didn't see right through that transparent attempt to guilt-trip me. Then came the passive aggression, subtle digs about my lonely life, and how I was missing out on real family connection. I deleted those messages without a second thought, the familiar sting of her words now dulled by my newfound resolve. The escalation was inevitable. Jessica moved from emotional blackmail to thinly veiled threats. She started calling my mother, twisting the narrative, portraying me as the heartless older sister who refused to share. My mother, bless her well-meaning but easily swayed heart, called me in tears, begging me to reconsider. "She's your sister, Sarah," she'd pleaded, her voice thick with worry. "Family is everything." I felt a pang of guilt, a familiar ache that Jessica had expertly exploited for decades. But this time, it was different. This time, the resentment burned hotter than the guilt. I explained, calmly but firmly, that this wasn't about family. It was about respect, or rather Jessica's complete lack of it. My mother, caught between us, eventually just sighed, a sound that spoke volumes of her helplessness. Then came the truly audacious move. I received a certified letter, a legal-looking document from a firm I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore it open. It was a formal request for me to consider allowing Jessica and her family access to my property for the specified dates, citing family hardship and the potential for irreparable damage to familial relationships if I refused. It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to intimidate me with legal jargon, but it still sent a shiver down my spine. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculated aggression, solidified my resolve. Jessica wasn't just demanding, she was actively trying to force my hand, to weaponize the very concept of family against me. I immediately called my own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn. I explained the situation, the history, the escalating demands. Evelyn listened patiently, her responses punctuated by reassuring hums. "This is classic harassment, Sarah," she stated, her voice calm and steady. "They have absolutely no legal standing. Your house is your property. You have every right to refuse access." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves, reinforcing the righteousness of my position. Evelyn drafted a concise professional response, shutting down their legal posturing without an ounce of drama. It felt good, a small victory in a battle that was rapidly growing in intensity. Jessica's next move was to spread rumors. My social media feeds, usually a tranquil space, became a subtle battleground. Friends of friends, distant relatives, even some of my own colleagues started asking me about the family drama. Whispers of my unreasonable behavior circulated, painting me as selfish and unfeeling. It was a subtle, insidious attack on my reputation, designed to isolate me, to make me feel like the villain. The betrayal stung, not just from Jessica, but from those who so readily believed her distorted version of events. I found myself deleting comments, blocking accounts, and withdrawing from online interactions. The obsession to make her pay, to expose her manipulative tactics, began to consume me. I realized then that this wasn't just about my beach house anymore. This was about 20 years of being walked over, of having my boundaries ignored, of being treated as a stepping stone for Jessica's ambitions. The resentment had festered, growing into a deep, burning need for justice. I wasn't just defending my property. I was reclaiming my autonomy, my self-respect. The game had indeed begun, and I was no longer playing by her rules. I was playing by my own, and my rules were about to get very, very real. I started making phone calls, not to my mother or my friends, but to people who could help me understand Jessica's vulnerabilities, her weaknesses. I began to gather information, piece by painstaking piece, building my case, not in a courtroom, but in the court of my own making. The stage was set, and I was ready for the next act. The information I gathered painted a stark picture of Jessica, a masterpiece of self-deception and financial recklessness. Her family reunion wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a desperate attempt to impress her in-laws, a last-ditch effort to salvage a reputation she'd meticulously fabricated. Her husband, Mark, a man I barely knew, was apparently growing tired of her extravagant spending and constant demands. The beach house, in her twisted logic, was simply another asset she was entitled to leverage, a free luxury vacation that would showcase her imagined success. I learned about the mounting debt, the overdue payments, the precarious balancing act she performed daily, all hidden behind a facade of effortless prosperity. It was more than just entitlement. It was a deep-seated insecurity, a fear of being exposed as the fraud she truly was. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about the unraveling of a life built on sand, much like the one she expected to occupy for free. My strategy began to coalesce, sharp and precise. I wouldn't simply deny her the house, I would make her regret ever thinking she could take what was mine. I started by subtly influencing the narrative among our mutual acquaintances, planting seeds of doubt about Jessica's recent financial ventures, questions about her sudden need for such an ostentatious display. It wasn't outright slander, but rather carefully phrased concerns, observations that would naturally lead others to connect the dots. I knew Jessica thrived on external validation, and chipping away at that foundation was the first step. The calls I made weren't just for information. They were for whispers, for carefully placed suggestions that would inevitably find their way back to her. Then came the legal preparations, a move Jessica would never anticipate. While she was busy planning her grand entrance, I was consulting with a real estate lawyer, crafting an ironclad lease agreement for my property. It wasn't just any lease. It was a document designed to be a legal minefield for any unauthorized occupants. It detailed exorbitant daily rates for unapproved stays, severe penalties for property damage, and, most crucially, a clause explicitly stating that the property was not available for rent or use by anyone other than myself during the specified period. It was a preemptive strike, a legal shield, and a sword all in one. I knew she wouldn't bother with such trivialities as legal documents. Her arrogance would be her undoing. The day before her expected arrival, I took a flight to Malibu. The house, my sanctuary, stood gleaming under the California sun, oblivious to the storm brewing. I walked through each room, a bittersweet ache in my chest. This place held so many cherished memories, moments of peace and joy that Jessica's brazen demand had tainted. As I meticulously cleaned and prepared, I wasn't just tidying up, I was reclaiming my space, asserting my ownership not just physically but emotionally. I placed a framed photograph of my parents, their faces beaming, on the mantelpiece, a silent testament to the values of hard work and respect that Jessica had so conveniently forgotten. Then, with a heavy heart, I executed the next phase of my plan. I arranged for a local property management company, one known for its strict adherence to rules and regulations, to monitor the house. They were instructed to document any attempt at unauthorized entry, to issue immediate eviction notices, and to contact the authorities if necessary. I provided them with a copy of the meticulously drafted lease agreement, highlighting the clauses that would come into play. This wasn't about malice. It was about self-preservation, about protecting what I had built. Jessica's disregard for boundaries had forced my hand, and I was determined to teach her a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The trap was set. My phone, usually a source of mundane calls, now felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting for the inevitable detonation. I pictured Jessica, her elaborate plans, her self-assured smile, crashing headfirst into the wall of reality I had so carefully constructed. I imagined her surprise, her indignation, as her sense of entitlement met the cold, hard truth of legal boundaries. There was a knot of anxiety in my stomach, a tremor of doubt that whispered about the cost of this confrontation, the irreparable damage to our already strained relationship. But beneath that doubt was a steel-hard resolve. This wasn't just for me. It was for every time Jessica had taken advantage, every boundary she had trampled, every expectation she had demanded. This was for every time she had treated my life, my achievements, as an extension of her own undeserved privilege. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama Jessica never saw coming. The anticipation was a potent mix of dread and grim satisfaction. I knew, with chilling certainty, that the coming days would redefine our relationship forever, and I was ready for it. The day arrived with a brutal clarity, much like a perfectly aimed punch to the gut. I had meticulously planned every detail, every agonizing step, and now it was time for the curtain to rise on the final act of this twisted family drama. Jessica, oblivious in her bubble of entitlement, had messaged me that morning, a breezy text confirming her arrival with her 22 in-laws later that afternoon. The audacity still astounded me, even after weeks of preparation. She even had the nerve to ask if I'd left a key under the mat, as if my home were a public Airbnb she'd graciously booked. My stomach churned with a volatile cocktail of anxiety and grim satisfaction. This wasn't about a house anymore. It was about 2 decades of being treated as less than, of having my boundaries trampled, my achievements diminished. This was about finally drawing a line in the sand, a line Jessica would never be able to cross again. I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs, a stark contrast to the bitterness in my soul. I drove to the beach house, my sanctuary, now a stage for the reckoning. The sun glinted off the ocean, mocking the storm brewing within me. I pulled up to the curb, parking a little ways down the street, and watched. It wasn't long before a caravan of SUVs and minivans, overflowing with people and luggage, pulled into my driveway. Jessica, ever the ringleader, emerged from the first vehicle, a triumphant grin plastered across her face. She gestured grandly at my home, as if presenting a trophy she had rightfully claimed. Her husband, a perpetually bewildered man named Mark, trailed behind her, already looking overwhelmed by the sheer number of relatives. The in-laws spilled out, a chaotic swarm of unfamiliar faces, their chatter and laughter echoing across the quiet street. Children immediately began darting towards the beach, their excited shouts piercing the afternoon air. Jessica, meanwhile, marched confidently to the front door, her hand already reaching for the doorknob, expecting it to open effortlessly, to welcome her and her entourage into my life. Her confident smile faltered slightly, as the door remained stubbornly locked. She tried again, then knocked, a little impatiently at first, then with growing frustration. I watched from my car, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the moment I had rehearsed in my mind countless times. Finally, she pulled out her phone, dialing my number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered, my voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Jessica. Sarah, what's going on? The door's locked. Did you forget to leave the key?" Her voice was already edged with irritation, the first crack in her veneer of assumed control. "Forget? No, Jessica. I didn't forget anything," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I'm actually here." I stepped out of my car and began walking slowly towards the house, towards her. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw me, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. The in-laws, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, quieted down, their curious gazes now fixed on me. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I thought you had that big project," she stammered, her usual bravado momentarily deserting her. "I do have a big project, Jessica, and it's right here." I stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see the dawning realization in her eyes. I held up a crisp white envelope, its contents clearly visible. It was a legal document, an eviction notice, addressed to occupants of 123 Ocean View Drive. Her gaze dropped to the paper, then snapped back to my face, her eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "What is this, Sarah? What kind of sick joke is this?" "No joke, Jessica. This is a formal eviction notice. You and your 22 guests are trespassing. You have precisely 1 hour to vacate my property." My voice was calm, almost detached, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging within me. "Your property? This is our family's property. You can't do this," she shrieked, her face turning crimson. The in-laws exchanged uncomfortable glances, some already beginning to gather their belongings. "Oh, but I can, Jessica, and I am. This house is mine. I bought it, I paid for it, I maintain it. It is not a free hotel for you and your husband's extended family. It is my home, and you are not welcome here." A gasp went through the crowd of in-laws. Mark stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Jessica, what's going on?" he asked, his voice strained. "She's lost her mind, Mark. She's trying to kick us out," Jessica wailed, pointing an accusing finger at me. "No, Jessica, I'm simply reclaiming what's mine. For 20 years you've treated my life as an extension of your own entitlement. You've taken, demanded, and never once considered me. This ends today." My voice, though quiet, carried an undeniable weight of finality. Her face contorted into a mask of pure rage, but beneath it, I saw a flicker of something else. Fear. The world, as Jessica knew it, was crumbling around her. The sheer scale of her miscalculation, the public humiliation, the utter lack of control. It was all hitting her at once. The silent stares of her in-laws, their whispers now audible, were a far more potent weapon than any shout. "You can't do this to me, Sarah. I'm your sister," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You stopped being my sister the moment you started treating me like a doormat. Now you have 1 hour. After that, I will call the police, and they will escort you off my property." I turned, walking back towards my car, leaving her standing there, surrounded by her bewildered family, the eviction notice a stark white flag of surrender in her trembling hand. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant crash of waves and the sudden, frantic rustling of bags being packed. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, as Jessica's family processed the scene. I watched, a strange calm settling over me, as her husband, a man I barely knew, gently took the eviction notice from her trembling fingers. He read it, his face paling with each line, then looked at Jessica with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disbelief and utter disappointment. The rest of the family, a bewildered collection of adults and restless children, began to murmur. They hadn't understood the depth of Jessica's entitlement, the sheer audacity of her plan. Now, it was laid bare for all of them. I didn't linger. My statement had been made, my boundary drawn. As I drove away, the image of Jessica, standing amidst the wreckage of her grand scheme, was burned into my mind. There was no triumph in my heart, only a quiet, resolute sense of justice. The years of her taking, her manipulating, her treating my accomplishments as her own personal piggy bank, had finally culminated in this moment. The drive back to my own life, to my real home, felt lighter than it had in a long time. The burden of her expectations, of her relentless demands, had finally been shed. Days turned into a week, and then 2. The phone, usually a constant source of Jessica's complaints and requests, remained silent. It was a silence I savored, a piece I hadn't realized I was missing until it arrived. I imagined her trying to explain to her in-laws why their lavish vacation had been so abruptly cut short, why they were now scrambling for alternative accommodation. The thought brought a small, grim smile to my face. This wasn't about cruelty, it was about consequences. It was about showing her that the world, and more importantly, I, would no longer bend to her whims. Then the call came. It wasn't Jessica. It was my mother, her voice laced with a familiar mix of exasperation and veiled accusation. "Sarah, what have you done to your sister? She's distraught. Her husband's family, they've canceled their engagement, all because of this beach house fiasco." My mother's words hit me with a jolt. I hadn't anticipated that. My intention was to reclaim my space, to set a clear boundary, not to dismantle Jessica's life. Yet, as I listened to my mother's lament, a different emotion surfaced. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, "Jessica chose to put her family in that position. She chose to lie, to demand, to assume. I simply enforced my ownership of my property." My mother sighed, a sound that conveyed decades of dealing with Jessica's drama. "She says you humiliated her, that you deliberately sabotaged her relationship." "And what about how she humiliated me, Mom? For years? What about her sabotaging my peace, my privacy, my right to my own home?" The words, long suppressed, tumbled out. "This wasn't about revenge, Mom. It was about survival. It was about finally saying enough." The conversation ended with a strained silence, but for the first time I didn't feel guilty. I felt heard. I felt seen. The true fallout of Jessica's actions wasn't just the loss of a vacation spot, it was the unraveling of the carefully constructed facade she presented to the world. Her entitlement had finally caught up to her, not just with me, but with those whose respect she so desperately craved. Weeks later, a small, unassuming envelope arrived in the mail. It was from Jessica. Inside, there was no apology, no acknowledgement of her wrongdoing. Instead, it was a single, crumpled photo. a picture of her and her husband, looking strained and distant, at what appeared to be a very modest, hastily arranged gathering. On the back, scrawled in her familiar looping hand, were just 3 words. You were right. You were right. 3 words that spoke volumes. They weren't an apology, not truly. But they were an admission. An acknowledgement, however grudging, that her actions had consequences. That her world wasn't simply a playground for her desires. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology from Jessica, and in its own way, it was enough. The beach house remained my sanctuary, its waves still. Crashing, its sunsets still breathtaking, but now it felt different. It wasn't just a symbol of my hard work, it was a testament to my strength, to my ability to protect what was mine. The emotional scars of years of Jessica's demands wouldn't disappear overnight, but the bleeding had stopped. I had found a form of peace, a bittersweet closure that came from standing firm, from reclaiming my narrative, and from finally, truly, putting myself first. The price had been high, but the freedom I now felt was immeasurable. The chapter with Jessica, at least in its most toxic form, was finally closed. The eviction notice, crisp and stark against the vibrant beach house decor, felt like a physical blow. My sister, Sarah, snatched it from my hand, her eyes scanning the official letterhead. The color drained from her face, leaving her complexion ashen. Her voice, usually so boisterous, was a mere whisper. What is this, Jessica? I watched her, a strange mix of triumph and sorrow swirling inside me. The resentment that had festered for months, the betrayal that had cut so deep, had finally reached its crescendo. This wasn't just about a beach house anymore. It was about years of being overlooked, undervalued, and taken for granted. This was about finally standing up for myself. It's exactly what it looks like, Sarah, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The house is being foreclosed. I lost my job, remember? The one you so conveniently forgot about when you demanded my home for your 22 in-laws. Her jaw dropped. She looked around the meticulously kept living room, the one she'd always treated like a free hotel. The realization slowly dawned on her, a dawning horror that was almost palpable. But where will I put everyone? The caterers are booked, the entertainment, the custom-made cornhole boards. My mother-in-law will be furious. The obsession that had consumed me, the endless nights spent agonizing over how to reclaim my life, now found its release. I had explored every option, every legal loophole, every desperate plea for help. When none came, when even my own family dismissed my struggles, a cold resolve had settled in. I had made a choice, a difficult, heartbreaking choice, but one I knew was necessary. That, Sarah, is no longer my problem, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. You saw how I struggled after the layoff. You knew I was barely making ends meet. Did you offer help? Did you even offer a kind word? No. You just saw a free vacation rental. Her eyes, usually so confident, now held a flicker of panic. You can't be serious. This is Grandma's house, our family legacy. You wouldn't let it go. Grandma's house, I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. The same Grandma who left it to me. Not to you, Sarah. The same Grandma whose memory you've desecrated by treating this place like a cheap motel. I tried to keep it, Sarah. I really did. But when push came to shove, when I needed help, you were nowhere to be found. So yes, I let it go. Because I had no other choice. The confrontation was brutal, raw, and utterly necessary. Her face contorted, a mixture of anger and disbelief. You selfish witch! How could you do this to us? To our family? How could I do this? I scoffed, shaking my head. How could you do this? You pushed me to the brink, Sarah. You took and never gave an inch. This isn't about revenge, not entirely. This is about survival. This is about finally putting myself first. She began to pace, her voice rising in pitch. But the whole family is coming. What will I tell them? My husband's family will think we're destitute. Perhaps, I suggested, a hint of steel in my voice. You could tell them the truth. Tell them you pushed your sister so far. took so much from her that she had no choice but to let go of the one thing she had left. Tell them your self-entitlement cost her her home. The silence that followed was deafening. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw a crack in her impenetrable facade. The years of resentment, the sting of betrayal, the consuming obsession for justice, all culminated in this bittersweet moment. I had won, in a way. I had stood my ground. But the cost was immense. As she finally walked out, defeated, I felt a strange emptiness. The house, once filled with the ghosts of family memories, now felt cold and hollow. I had achieved my goal, but the victory felt tainted. I had gained my peace, but at the expense of a relationship that, however fractured, was still family. I learned a harsh lesson that day about boundaries, self-worth, and the true meaning of family. The beach house was gone, a casualty in a war I never wanted to fight. But in its place, I found something far more valuable: my own strength, my own voice, and the quiet, resolute understanding that sometimes, letting go is the only way to truly save yourself. The closure wasn't a celebration. It was a quiet, profound acceptance of a new beginning, alone, but finally free.